After a full decade of zero contact, there she was, my ex-wife, standing at a booth at the very same convention I was attending. I had gone off the grid to make damn sure she, her new husband, and his family never found me. And honestly, I'd done a hell of a job at it. Yet, despite all that effort, there she was, strolling right past me without even a flicker of recognition. That moment hit me like a freight train, and just like that, an idea started to take shape. See, when I want to be, I can be a real piece of work. Now, you might be wondering why my ex-wife's husband's family would even care about tracking me down. Well, that's because once upon a time, they were my family, too. Her current husband? He's my biological older brother. So yeah, that means his parents are my parents, and his sisters, my sisters. When everything fell apart, I didn't stick around to deal with the fallout. I just walked away and built myself a whole new life. For the last 10 years, I've been Luke Reynolds. Luke was already my middle name, and Reynolds? That came from a sticker I spotted on a window when I needed to come up with a last name in a hurry. And Jessica? Back in high school, she was Jessica Bishop. We had one of those classic, dragged-out high school romances, first love, senior prom, the whole deal. We were even each other's firsts. I thought I loved her. Hell, I thought she loved me, too. Turns out, what she really loved was my family's money. Yeah, my family had money. Mom and Dad owned a mid-sized manufacturing company. We made electronic components, some standard stuff, but that wasn't our real cash cow. The truth is, Chinese companies could beat us on price every single time. What kept us afloat was the Made in America requirements and the fact that we specialized in small-scale, high-value custom components. That niche turned out to be ridiculously profitable. Now, a little background on my family. Mom and Dad started the business long before I was born. Dad had an electronic engineering degree, and his best friend, his business partner, was a manufacturing engineer. But the real money in the family came from my great-grandfather on Dad's side. During the Great Depression, he made a fortune by lending money to desperate people trying to buy homes. When they couldn't make their payments, he took the land back, sometimes selling the same piece of property multiple times to different buyers. Maybe that's where my family's questionable morals came from. Then there's Daniel, my older brother. You already know about my parents. I also have twin sisters, both younger than me. Being the only daughters, they were spoiled beyond belief. If something didn't affect them personally, they didn't care. And if it did? They just went with whatever decision inconvenienced them the least. That probably explains a lot about their reaction when everything hit the fan. Now, on to the cliché part. Jessica and I got married after our sophomore year of college. 5 years into our marriage, I came home early one day and found her in bed with my older brother. That's when it all became crystal clear, Jessica had never really wanted me. I was just a stepping stone. Daniel was always going to inherit the family business, while I was destined to be nothing more than a glorified employee. Technically, I would have been second in command, but in reality, Daniel would be the one with all the power, the prestige, and the connections. Jessica and I had known each other since high school and started dating during our senior year. We both attended the local college, and by the end of our sophomore year, she was pregnant. So, we did what we thought was the right thing, we got married that summer. She dropped out to take care of the baby, while I stayed in school to finish my degree. My family pitched in a lot to help us out. By the time Lily turned 2, Jessica took a job as an administrative assistant at my family's business. They even had an on-site daycare, so she didn't have to worry about childcare. Still, I couldn't help but wonder, how the hell did she even get pregnant in the first place? We always used protection. As far as I knew, nothing ever broke. She couldn't take the pill because she had a bad reaction to it, so that was off the table. But even with all the precautions, somehow, it still happened. Well, shit happens. I didn't dwell on it too much, but looking back, there were a couple of odd moments over the next 5 years, twice, to be exact. Both times, Jessica had some vague medical issue that kept us from having sex for about a week. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. I wanted more kids, but it just hadn't happened yet. I kept hoping for a son this time around. Now, don't get me wrong, I adored my daughter. But let's be real, most men want at least one boy to carry on the family name. And yeah, I hear all the feminists rolling their eyes, telling me that women can keep their married names if they want. I also hear the arguments that a father can teach his daughter everything he could teach a son. I get it, girls can be gearheads, love muscle cars, racing, sports, and whatever else. But there's something ingrained in a man's brain, a deep-rooted instinct, that makes him want a son as an heir. It's not about love or favoritism, it's just how we're wired. That said, I loved my little girl, and if we'd had a son too, it would have just been the cherry on top. Our 5-year anniversary was coming up at the end of the week, and I had picked out something special for Jessica, a matching set of earrings and a necklace from a jeweler in town. I slipped out of the office to pick it up, planning to stash it at home before she got off work. Since we both worked at my family's company, and they had an on-site daycare, she never had to worry about who would watch Lily. With the gift in hand, I drove home, but as I got closer, I noticed something off, Daniel's car sitting in my driveway. That didn't make any sense. He was supposed to be at work, and there was no reason for him to be at my house in the middle of the day. A bad feeling crept up my spine. Instead of pulling in, I parked 2 houses down and walked up to the house. The front door was unlocked. My stomach twisted as I quietly stepped inside, following the unmistakable sounds coming from the master bedroom. I didn't need to see it to know what was happening, but I had to. Sure enough, there they were, Daniel and Jessica, tangled up in my bed, having themselves a damn good time. Even now, I don't know how I managed to keep my cool. But somehow, I did. Instead of charging in and tearing the place apart, I stayed quiet, pulled out my phone, and recorded a solid 5 minutes of their little rendezvous before slipping back out unnoticed. As sick as it made me, I needed more than just rage, I needed a plan. And from what I overheard, this wasn't some one-time thing. It had been going on for years. The fury inside me was boiling, but I knew better than to explode right then and there. Losing my temper would only end with me looking like the bad guy, and I'd already seen enough divorces play out to know the system wasn't built to protect the innocent husband. If I stormed in, I'd be the one losing everything. Jessica would get the house, I'd be stuck with the mortgage. She'd get custody, I'd be the dad with a few miserable visitation hours. She'd get child support, I'd get the joy of paying for a kid I'd barely see. And to top it all off, she'd be rewarded with spousal support, what they now call maintenance, meaning I'd get to fund her new life while she slept with other men. No, I wasn't about to walk into that trap. If I wanted to come out of this with anything left, I had to keep my mouth shut and play the long game. Oh, and one thing was for sure, Jessica wasn't getting that jewelry I had just bought. I spent the next 3 months putting my plan in motion. Now, you might think I started by avoiding sex with her, making excuses, or picking fights. But nope. That would have raised too many red flags. Instead, I did the opposite, I kept up the act of the loving husband. I didn't change a thing. Truth was, Jessica was a gorgeous woman, and her body hadn't lost its appeal. So yeah, I made sure to keep up appearances in the bedroom. It wasn't like she was sleeping around with the whole town, just my brother. And if I suddenly started dodging intimacy, she'd get suspicious. So, I put on the best performance of my life, Oscar-worthy, if I say so myself. I played the devoted husband and father, acting like nothing had changed. And as I went through the motions, I quietly set the stage for what was coming next. Oh, and I don't think I mentioned it before, but I was the IT manager at the company. That little fact? It was about to come in real handy. It didn't take long for me to realize just how little my family actually thought of me. They must have never stopped to consider the fact that I was the IT manager, the one who had full control over every system in the company. My team handled everything: software, hardware, programming, you name it. If it had a computer code running through it, I had access. And I don't mean just basic access. No, I had what I like to call the God codes, a set of unrestricted access credentials that let me control every single machine the company owned. Laptops, desktops, smartphones, CNC machines, 3D printers, hell, even the coffee makers in the break room had been reprogrammed by me at some point. A little word of advice: if you're going to screw over the IT guy, don't use company assets to talk about it. 5 minutes after sitting down in my office, I had access to every single email and text message they had ever sent. And yes, I do mean all of them. I started with just Jessica and Daniel's messages, but the deeper I dug, the worse it got. Turns out, my parents had known about the affair the entire time. One particular message from my mother stood out: she had actually warned my sisters to be careful not to let anything slip to me. So not only did they all know, but they were actively covering for them. At that moment, I was already standing on the edge of my breaking point. You'd think it couldn't possibly get any worse. You'd be wrong. That's when I found out that Lily, my daughter, wasn't even mine. She was Daniel's. Those weird times when Jessica suddenly couldn't have sex for a week? Abortions. 2 of them. She had aborted both of my children while carrying Daniel's baby to term. The sheer level of betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just an affair, it was years of deception, carefully planned out so that I would stay in place, unknowingly raising another man's child, pouring my time, money, and love into a lie. They needed to pay. And I don't mean some petty revenge. They needed to suffer. The more I uncovered, the more methodical I became. My emotions took a back seat to my strategy. This wasn't just about Jessica and Daniel anymore, my entire family had plotted against me. Now, you might be wondering, why? Why go through all this effort? I was wondering the same thing. It turned out the answer was simple: greed. Daniel had always been the golden boy, the one being groomed to take over the family business. I was never meant to be more than a shareholder, a minor one at that, kept in place as the head of IT, nothing more. They wanted me to stick around just long enough to keep the machines running while they searched for a replacement. The long-term plan? String me along until Jessica filed for divorce, then she'd marry Daniel. His paycheck would be a hell of a lot bigger than mine ever could be. But they couldn't rush it. Not yet. They needed me to stay, needed me to fix their problems until they found someone else. And in the meantime, I was footing the bill for their child, paying for Jessica's expenses, making it easier for Daniel to build up his wealth before their eventual transition. And the best part? They were never going to tell me the truth about Lily. They planned to keep me on the hook for child support for years, draining me for every penny they could get. That was when my plan really started. For the next 3 months, I began quietly siphoning money out of our investment accounts, funneling it into a private account in the Cayman Islands. Bit by bit, I drained assets in a way that wouldn't be detected. Then, I sold Jessica on an idea, taking out a second mortgage to install a luxurious swimming pool and entertainment area in the backyard. Naturally, she was all for it. More space for her and Daniel to entertain their guests, all while leaving me with the financial burden. It took a full month to get the loan approved. Every last cent went straight into my offshore account. To keep up appearances, I started bringing home blueprints and designs for the so-called renovations, pretending I was working on it. I even went as far as listing the job online, taking bids from contractors to make it all look legitimate. Jessica had no clue what was really happening. At the same time, I hired a private investigator. His job? To bug the entire house. He planted high-definition cameras and audio recorders in every key area while Jessica was at work. Every single thing they said, every touch, every laugh, every moment of their secret life together, all of it was being uploaded to a private cloud server that only I, my PI, and my divorce lawyer could access. They had played me for a fool. Now, it was my turn to play them. I kept pulling every email and text message I could get my hands on, saving copies and printing out hard evidence. Then, I opened a brand new safety deposit box at a different bank under my alias, Luke Reynolds. I wasn't about to make the mistake of keeping this information anywhere they could find it. I knew exactly what was coming. Once everything hit the fan, they'd lose their damn minds. They'd come after me with everything they had, harassment, legal threats, trying to recover whatever they could. But by then, it would be far too late. So, I got ahead of it. I built a couple of fake online personas, social media profiles, a business website, everything needed to establish Victor Reynolds as a successful, wealthy entrepreneur. According to my carefully crafted backstory, he held an MBA and 2 bachelor's degrees, one in business administration, the other in international finance. Was any of it real? Hell no. Would it pass a deep background check? Not a chance. But that didn't matter. I wasn't trying to convince the government, just the people I was planning to fool. Forging documents is a hell of a lot easier than people think. All it takes is a believable photo, some basic information, and a few strategic purchases on the dark web. Add in a small payment to the right people, and within 2 weeks, I had an anonymous package land right on my desk with everything I needed. Never mess with the IT guy. Of course, I wasn't just relying on paper trails and digital deception. I needed undeniable proof. So, I ran a DNA test. I waited until Lily was asleep, then carefully swabbed her cheek. I swabbed my own next. The tricky part was getting Daniel's DNA, but I managed to snag it from a glass he had used at a family gathering. I sealed up the samples and shipped them off. I used my company email to receive the results. Why? Because when I finally walked away, I wanted them to find it. I wanted them to dig into my emails and realize just how deep their betrayal went. At this point, it was clear, I wasn't just burning Jessica in the divorce. Daniel was getting scorched, too. Hell, my entire family was about to go down in flames. But Daniel? Daniel was easy. The man was a bully and an arrogant fool. I didn't need to do much, just let him be himself. Once he officially took over the company, he'd run it straight into the ground. He lacked the skill, the patience, and the brains to keep things running. Within a couple of years, the business would be bankrupt, and he'd be the laughingstock of the industry, the man who single-handedly destroyed a multi-million-dollar empire. I figured I could help speed that process along. After all, my family owed me for what they had done. I did what I do best, I got into the system. I created fake accounts, falsified invoices, and slipped a few key lines of code into the company's financial software. Nothing blatant enough to raise alarms, but subtle enough to bleed them dry over time. Oh, and let's not forget about me, Luke Reynolds was about to walk away filthy rich. But the real kicker? The final piece of my revenge? I built a bomb. No, not a literal bomb, I wasn't about to blow up buildings or hurt anyone. I'm not a militant. This was a software bomb, one designed to bring the company to its knees. I spent a week crafting it, setting it up with specific triggers. I could either detonate it remotely or let it go off automatically once a few pre-programmed conditions were met. When it triggered, every single computer, server, and smartphone in the company would crash simultaneously. The CNC and milling machines? Some would shut down. Others would go completely haywire. And then, the day finally came. Now, I know, maybe I should have done things differently. Maybe it would have been smarter, safer, more calculated if I had stayed far away when it all went down. But the truth? I wanted to be there. I wanted to see the chaos unfold with my own eyes. Sticking around gave them the opportunity to confront me face to face. That was the only real downside to my plan. There was always a chance they could corner me, maybe even try to intimidate or threaten me. Yeah, in hindsight, it wasn't the smartest move. But let's be honest, who can resist watching a train wreck when they know it's about to happen? It's not every day you get a front row seat to chaos you engineered yourself. The way I saw it, this was my masterpiece, and I wasn't about to miss the grand finale. Besides, if things went sideways, I had a backup plan to buy myself enough time to slip away. Turns out, I didn't need it. I was standing in the main lobby when she walked in. She couldn't have been more than mid-20s, dressed sharp and professional, exuding confidence. And damn, I have to admit, she was stunning. In one hand, she carried a briefcase, and tucked under her arm were 3 manila envelopes. That was my cue. Time to set things in motion. I strolled straight into my father's office and, without a word, dropped a sealed envelope onto his desk. "What's this?" he asked, his tone sharp with suspicion. I didn't answer. Instead, I simply raised my hand, fingers spread wide. 5. I curled one finger down. 4. Another. 3. His brows furrowed. 2. From the hall, a wail of distress erupted. 1. Another scream, followed by a man's voice shouting, "What the hell is this?" Just as I expected. The storm had begun. And then, the blonde bombshell appeared in my father's doorway. "Mr. Thomas Brooks?" she asked, her southern drawl smooth as honey and sharp as a knife. "Yes, I am," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Without missing a beat, she handed him the final envelope and smiled. "Y'all have been served. Have a nice day." She snapped a quick photo of him holding the envelope for legal proof, then turned on her heel and walked out, heels clicking against the floor. I let out a low chuckle, then laughed outright. Before anyone in the office could process what had just happened, I was already gone. Before walking out, I left one last thing on my father's desk, my resignation letter, effective immediately. The reason? Hostile work environment. And I had plenty of evidence to back it up. It wasn't just about the affair, it was the fact that company leadership had known and allowed it to continue. The president of the company had been openly screwing his employee's wife, and management had encouraged it. Jessica was served with divorce papers on the spot. Daniel? He got his own special delivery, a lawsuit for creating a hostile work environment and alienation of affection. But I wasn't done yet. I was also suing him for back child support, the payments I had made for his daughter, as well as future child support. I had already emptied my office days before. My home? Cleared out. I had quietly taken everything that was mine without them noticing. Financially, everything was already set in motion. Jessica got the house, but I had already drained the savings account before walking away. My lawyer held power of attorney, meaning she could handle every legal matter without me ever showing up. By the time the door closed behind me, Nathan Brooks was dead, and Luke Reynolds was officially born. And just like that, I was gone for 10 years. The aftermath. Jessica tried to play hardball, but it backfired spectacularly. A judge ordered me to pay child support, until my lawyer presented DNA proof that I had never been Lily's father in the first place. It was deliberate deception, and the court didn't take kindly to that. I countersued Daniel for child support, and guess what? I won. Jessica made a desperate attempt to squeeze me for alimony, but since I was now unemployed, while she was earning more than me, my lawyer politely declined on my behalf. She was left with the house, but only because my lawyer had prepared a quitclaim deed, signing it over to her. Every remaining asset? That was hers, too. Daniel moved in before the ink even dried. Meanwhile, I was already relocated to the West Coast, my past life completely erased. As for the alienation of affection lawsuit, it went nowhere, they rarely do. But that didn't matter. I had already won the aftermath and reinvention. Daniel ended up having to pay me a hefty sum, a couple $100,000, for creating a hostile work environment. Turns out, being the boss and sleeping with your employee's wife doesn't sit well with judges. But that wasn't the only payout. The company itself settled for around $2 million after undeniable evidence showed they had not only known about the affair but had actively encouraged it. When it was all said and done, between the lawsuits, the money I had siphoned, my investments, and the savings I took with me, I walked away with just over $4 million. Jessica? Yeah, she was legally entitled to half of the savings and investments. Too bad for her, I was long gone. Good luck finding me, or the money. For 6 months, I laid low, waiting until all the dust had settled. Then, when the time was right, I pulled the trigger on the final phase of my plan. The software bomb. It hit everything. The servers? Fried. The CNC machines? Their entire coding system rewritten. The financial records? Gone. For 2 weeks, the entire production line was crippled. Machines started spitting out defective products, deadlines were missed, and the entire schedule was thrown into chaos. By the time they recovered, the damage had been done. A new life begins. With my past buried, I started fresh. I launched an IT consulting firm, making sure to keep my name off the books by running it through an offshore LLC. Business took off, and before long, I was doing very well for myself. Then, 2 years after I vanished, fate threw me a curveball, one that, surprisingly, worked in my favor. I got into a serious traffic accident. A semi-truck plowed into my car, and I needed significant facial reconstructive surgery. But rather than seeing it as a setback, I saw an opportunity. Since I was already on the operating table, I had them tweak a few things. I always thought my nose was too big, so I had them fix that. My chin was a little weak, so I had them reshape it. They were minor changes, but combined, they made me look completely different from the man I used to be. For years, I had kept a goatee to hide my jawline. Now, I went clean-shaven. By the time I healed, Nathan Brooks was truly gone. And the best part? The trucking company that caused the accident had to pay for it. A better version of me. The accident also forced me into physical therapy, which, at first, was brutal. But something unexpected happened. I got into the habit of pushing myself harder. Before, I was fit but not particularly strong, just enough to avoid getting soft from sitting in an office all day. Now, I was bigger, stronger, and leaner than ever before. What started as rehab turned into a full-blown lifestyle change. My once flat stomach became a defined six-pack. My arms, chest, and legs bulked up with muscle. And I felt better than I ever had in my life. The unexpected business move. The trucking company that hit me? It turned out the driver was high on speed, had forged his logbooks, had been driving too long, and the truck itself was in terrible condition. In the lawsuit that followed, I ended up with something far more valuable than money. I took ownership of the company. First order of business? Cleaning house. I fired 5 drivers immediately and put strict safety regulations in place. The company had a terrible reputation, but once I took over, I turned things around fast. I met with NTSB regulators, laid out a detailed plan for improvements, and kept them regularly updated. The insurance company saw what I was doing, and our rates dropped significantly. With new mechanics, better safety policies, and properly maintained trucks, we rebuilt the company's reputation. In no time, we were delivering on schedule, safely, and with efficiency. And then I saw her. Now, here I was, standing in a high-end convention center, face to face with my past. For the first time in 10 years, I saw Jessica. The moment I laid eyes on her, something dark stirred inside me. Betrayal. Anger. Resentment. Sure, I had moved on. I had erased my past and rebuilt my life. But they had never paid for what they did to me. Not really. They had never felt the kind of gut-wrenching, soul-crushing pain they put me through. They had never suffered the way I had suffered. That's when an idea, a wicked, sinister idea, began to form. I would pay them back in the exact same way they betrayed me. Jessica had no idea who I was. She walked right past me, looked me in the eyes, and smiled, not the way you smile at an old enemy, but the way a woman smiles at a man she finds attractive. She had no clue. And that? That made this even better. She walked right past me, looked directly into my eyes, and smiled. It wasn't overtly flirty, just that subtle, unconscious kind of smile a woman gives when she finds a man attractive. And she had no idea who I was. This was going to be fun. I knew exactly how to play this game. I knew her weaknesses, her motivations, and the kind of bait she couldn't resist. And lucky for me, I had the perfect lure for this particular trap. Then, a thought hit me. I pulled out my phone and checked the date. Perfect. My original plan had been simple, make her suffer in the same way she had made me suffer. But now? Now, I could do even more damage. I just had to make her believe it was safe to take the bait. I took a breath, straightened my suit jacket, and sauntered over to her booth. I had absolutely no interest in whatever useless products her company was peddling. But she didn't need to know that. I grabbed a brochure, pretending to read it with interest. "Do you have any questions about our products or services?" Her voice was smooth and professional, but the moment I looked up, I saw it, recognition. Not of who I was, but of what I looked like. A rich man. A potential client. Pretending to notice her for the first time, I gave a polite, thoughtful nod. "Actually, I do have a few questions," I said. "But I don't have the time right now to go over everything in detail. I'm looking at placing a large order, but I'm heading to a meeting at the moment." Her eyes lit up. Hook set. "Oh, okay. Can you stop by later?" she asked, trying to sound casual. I feigned disappointment and checked my watch. "Unfortunately, I won't be free until around 7 tonight," I said, as if I had a packed schedule. "That's when the expo closes, isn't it?" She nodded. Time to reel her in. "Tell you what," I said, slipping a card from my pocket. "I'll be at my hotel this evening, just taking it easy. If you want, give me a call, and we can set up a time to talk." I saw the spark of interest in her eyes. Money. Business. Opportunity. Or, I added smoothly, "I'll make dinner reservations at Mario's for 7. It's right here in the hotel, and I've heard it's one of the best Italian spots in the city. You can meet me there, and we can discuss what your company has to offer." Then, deliberately, I let my gaze drop to her left hand before adding, "And of course, feel free to bring your husband along. After all, it's just business." She hesitated, just for a split second, before her smile grew wider. "Gotcha. That sounds great," she said quickly. "But it'll just be me. My husband couldn't make the trip this time." "Of course not." I played dumb. "Oh. That's a shame. Would you like to invite any of your colleagues?" I already knew the answer. No way in hell was she about to split any potential commission with a coworker. She shook her head. "Unfortunately, they're all unavailable. It'll just be me, but I can answer all your questions." Bingo. I flashed her a charming smile, tucked my card into her hand, and sauntered off toward the exit. I didn't have a meeting. I went straight up to my penthouse suite to prepare. Setting the stage. After a long shower and a fresh shave, I got ready. I slipped into another tailored Armani suit, because wearing the same one twice? That would ruin the illusion. Every detail had to scream wealth and success. By the time I made my way to the restaurant, Jessica was already there. And, judging by the effort she had put into her appearance, she wasn't just trying to sell me a product, she was selling herself, too. She had gone all out. A short, form-fitting black dress hugged her curves, the plunging neckline leaving little to the imagination. Her 5-inch stilettos practically screamed, "Come and get me," and I found myself wondering if she had opted for thigh-high stockings or a garter belt. Either way, I knew exactly where this night was heading. Her dress clung to her hips, and I couldn't see any panty lines, which meant either she was wearing something very delicate, or nothing at all. She had no clue who I was. And that made this all the more satisfying that I didn't even need to dangle the bait in front of her anymore, she was practically letting me drop it straight into her mouth. This was almost too easy. Honestly, it was kind of boring. But sure enough, over dinner, she answered every single question I threw at her. She even went into detail about why her product was better than anything her competitors had to offer. We talked costs, quantities, and all the usual business stuff. I played my part perfectly, nodding along, acting impressed, and assuring her that when we were ready to place an order, she'd be the first one we called. Of course, I couldn't commit to anything this week. I explained we were still figuring out the size of the order, how many units would go to each location, and a few other logistical details. I told her we'd finalize everything within the next 2 weeks. What she didn't know was that I had absolutely no use for her products. And even if I did, I'd never buy them from her company. I'd go straight to her biggest competitor instead. Once dinner was over, I casually suggested it was still early and maybe we could hit a nightclub for a drink or two. She was more than happy to agree. I'm pretty sure she'd looked me up online while getting ready for dinner. My profile would have shown her I was as wealthy as I appeared. The way she clung to my arm and pressed herself against me on the dance floor made me wonder if she was already thinking about trading up. After a couple of drinks and a few dances, we ended up in my suite. And no, she wasn't drunk, she knew exactly what she was doing. In fact, she was the one who suggested it. I could practically see the dollar signs in her eyes. Oh, and I'd noticed earlier at the club that she wasn't wearing panties. When I slid my hand up her thigh, she didn't protest at all. Instead, she just smiled and spread her legs wider, inviting me in. "I'm not on the pill," she whispered as I kissed her neck and nibbled on her earlobe. "Don't worry," I replied. "I've been snipped, and I'm allergic to latex, so no protection for me." She just nodded and said okay. Maybe she should have thought twice about it, but I was doing everything I could to keep her distracted. We went 3 rounds that night. The next day, she moved all her things into my suite. We had sex every single night. Then, on the last morning of the conference, she finally asked, "So, is there a Mrs. Reynolds? A fiancé or girlfriend?" I'd been waiting for that question. It was obvious I wasn't wearing a ring, but I decided to have a little fun with it. "Nope," I said. "I was married for a couple of years, but we split up. We were too young when we got married, and we just drifted apart. I haven't found anyone else yet, but I'm thinking it's about time I settled down." She smiled and said, "Well, I'd definitely like to see you again. I'm really starting to like you. It's not just that you're a fantastic lover, I enjoy our conversations and just being around you." Then I asked, "What about your husband? Wouldn't that cause some issues if we started dating seriously?" She shrugged. "We're basically roommates at this point. We don't even sleep in the same room. I can't even remember the last time we had sex." I nodded and said, before I can really focus on a relationship, I've got a lot of business stuff to deal with. I'll be traveling a ton over the next few months. I'll reach out to you when I'm done with everything, I told her. After 2 more rounds of sex, we cleaned up, packed our things, and checked out of the hotel. She went her way, and I went mine, with the usual empty promise to stay in touch. As I was about to board the plane, I ripped up her business card and tossed it in the trash. The following Monday, I got in touch with a security firm I kept on retainer. I tasked them with keeping a close eye on Jessica and my former family for the next few months. Turns out, she hadn't been entirely honest with me. She and her husband were far from being just roommates. The security team managed to plant hidden cameras and microphones inside their house. From what I saw, they were having sex 3 or 4 times a week. Yeah, I know it was completely illegal, but this security company was top-notch when it came to gathering intel. I didn't care much about their methods, I just needed specific information. One thing that surprised me was how faithful Daniel was to Jessica, at least now, anyway. I couldn't vouch for the last 10 years, but currently, he was loyal. He also wanted another kid, preferably a boy. I also learned they had this little ritual. The night before either of them had to travel, they'd try to wear each other out with sex. That detail made me smile. 2 months later, I got the news I'd been waiting for. I watched the camera feed as Jessica set up the living room for Daniel's return from work. When he walked through the door, she made the big reveal, "Congratulations, Daddy. You managed to knock me up again." He looked stunned at first, then overjoyed. "How far along are you?" he asked. "About 2 months, she replied. It must have happened the night before I left for that week-long conference in Las Vegas or the night I got back. Apparently, she still believed I was shooting blanks. She even called me later, leaving a tearful message about how she and her husband had reconciled and that she wouldn't be able to run off with me after all. That gave me a good laugh. After that, I had the security company remove all the cameras and stop monitoring them. I didn't need them anymore, I could handle the rest on my own. I set a reminder on my Outlook calendar for a couple of months later, right around 9 months after the conference. Sure enough, I checked the birth announcements in my hometown and found a picture of Jessica holding a newborn baby boy, with a smiling Daniel looking over her shoulder. By then, I'd finished transitioning the management of all my companies and was sitting in my hacienda in Costa Rica, looking at the photo online. I wasn't planning to stay holed up there forever, it was just one of the many properties I owned around the world. Besides, I wasn't Luke Reynolds anymore. Good luck finding him, though. They'd figure out soon enough that it was just an alias. It was time to wrap up my revenge. I switched over to a new Gmail account I'd set up specifically for this. Now, let's hear Jessica's side of the story. It had been 2 weeks since little Luke was born. I'm still not entirely sure how I convinced Daniel to name him that. Don't get me wrong, I had no illusions that Luke was the father. He'd had a vasectomy and was shooting blanks. He even showed me the medical report to prove it. Daniel must have gotten me pregnant the night before I left for the conference or the night I came back. I just wanted to name the baby Luke as a little secret reminder of the incredible week I'd had. My husband was over the moon that we finally had a son. But lately, he'd been acting a little strange, especially in the days after the birth that I wasn't sure what was going on, but something felt off. I just put the baby down for a nap, and Lily was in her room, probably texting her friends. I was about to start making dinner when the front door slammed open. "You cheating 304. Daniel yelled at me. "How many times have you cheated on me?" I was stunned. There was no way he could have found out about Las Vegas. Sure, I'd started thinking about trying to snag Luke. Daniel had money, but Luke was on a whole different level. But once I found out Daniel and I were having another baby, I couldn't bring myself to leave him. "What are you talking about, Daniel? I've never cheated on you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It had been over 9 months since that conference in Vegas. There was no way he could have found out, at least, there couldn't be any proof now. He threw an envelope at me, and that's when I noticed his parents and his twin sisters had followed him into the house. I barely managed to catch the envelope before it hit the floor. "Who the hell is he?" Daniel demanded. "Daniel, I don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about," I said, my heart racing. "About 2 weeks ago, I got an email with a link to a website," he said, his voice shaking. "It showed a bunch of videos of you screwing some guy at that conference in Las Vegas 9 months ago. It also suggested I get a DNA test done on the baby. Said there'd be a couple of surprises in there. One big surprise is that I'm not the biological father." He took a few deep breaths, then continued. "I want to know who Luke's real father is." "Daniel, you are his real father," I insisted. That's when I opened the envelope. It was the results of a DNA test. The report said Daniel wasn't the father, or, more accurately, there was only about a 40% chance he was. Luke carried some of Daniel's DNA, but there was other DNA in the mix that neither of us had. "No, look," I said, trying to explain. "Daniel, it shows that you and Luke share some DNA." "No," he snapped. "It says he only carries some of my DNA. At best, it says I could be his uncle." He stopped speaking and got this strange look on his face. "Oh my God," my mother-in-law gasped. "Nathan." "No," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It can't be. Sure, there might have been a slight resemblance, but Luke couldn't be Nathan. DNA doesn't lie. Daniel wasn't the father, but he was a close relative of the real father. The only other male relative close enough to be a match was Daniel's father. And I definitely hadn't slept with my father-in-law. Luke was the only other man I'd been with, and I realized that week in Vegas was my fertile window. I was completely shocked. Then it hit me, Nathan was a genius with computers. How hard would it have been for him to fake a medical document like that? I remembered the 2 abortions I'd had after accidentally getting pregnant by Nathan. I'd made sure not to have his children. And now, in the cruelest twist of irony, I'd just given birth to his son. I'd slept with Nathan's brother, Daniel, thinking I was safe. But now, I'd accidentally given Daniel's brother, Nathan, a son. He knew. He knew. And he'd done it on purpose. "What are you talking about?" everyone demanded. I didn't recognize him at first. He looked completely different than he had 10 years ago. But I'm sure he recognized me. He knew all the right buttons to push. He knew exactly what he was doing. He seduced me, told me he'd had a vasectomy, and even showed me a medical report to back it up. My cycle is as regular as clockwork, and he must have remembered that I'd be at my peak fertility that week. Oh my God, he must have remembered the 2 abortions I'd had and how I'd purposely avoided having his children. Well, screw him. He sued me for Lily's child support back then, so now I'm going to sue him for his own child support. But just like Nathan Brooks had disappeared before, Luke Reynolds no longer existed. Daniel's attempt to file a child support suit went absolutely nowhere. You can't sue someone who doesn't exist. In the end, Daniel and Jessica stayed together. He'd be on the hook for child support for both Lily and Luke until they graduated from college. He'd also have to pay spousal support, the mortgage on the house, and at least half of all their assets. It was cheaper to keep her. They stayed married, but their relationship was permanently broken. They were living in a loveless marriage, nothing more than roommates with benefits. They still had sex occasionally, but it was just that, sex. No more making love. It was just 2 people relieving their urges. They sold the house and quietly split up as soon as Luke left for college. Don't worry about little Luke, though. Sure, he wasn't the offspring of the favored brother, but he was still a cute, happy baby. His grandparents spoiled him rotten, and Jessica's maternal instincts kicked in just fine. They decided to never let anyone know about his true parentage. Besides, Daniel had always wanted a son. They never had any more children after Luke. As for me, I did end up getting married again. My wife and I have 3 kids, 1 boy and 2 girls. I dote on them constantly. Every once in a while, I think about my other son out there. Yes, it would be nice to visit him and have him in my life, but that's just not possible. Maybe after he turns 18, I'll quietly reach out to him. And when I finally die, he'll be in for a shock. He's included in my will. Over the years, I sent my parents 4 anonymous emails. The first one let them know I'd gotten married, to a wedding they weren't invited to and a daughter-in-law they'd never meet. The next 3 emails announced the births of their grandchildren, whom they'd never get to see. This was my way of making them feel the loss they caused me. From what I hear, they've spent a small fortune on private investigators trying to track me and my kids down. Good luck with that. You might think I'm in the wrong here, and I won't argue. But remember what they did to me. I figured a little payback was fair. My brother betrayed me, so I turned the tables. My ex-wife intentionally chose not to have children with me, only to have a child with him instead. So, I tricked her into having my son while she was married to my brother. In my eyes, that's justice. Dear listeners, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.